Hello, I'm Helgas, and I welcome you goblin and ghouls to November. It's a shame that out of our 11 months, we don't have one dedicated to horror. So seeing this lack of a spooky month has made me obligated to sprinkle horror games throughout the year. So let's strap in as we're going to overcome. So what's a better place to start than the game that created the survival horror genre? Yeah, that's right, we're looking at Resident Evil Remake Remaster on the PlayStation 4. This will be a spoiler-free review, even though this game is as old as me, so much of it holds up today. So if you haven't played this masterpiece, I suggest you drop everything you're doing and go play it right now. Before we can jump into the game, we're going to look at the scariest part of any video game, the game development. So what's scary about the development of the Resident Evil remake? Well, the development itself isn't too scary, but the impact this game has left on Capcom is bone-tingling horrifying, as this game would be the main reason for the series moving towards the action formulas, which led to this. No! It's way too early to be an I pissed my pants terrified. So let's rewind back and start at the beginning of this story. This brings us back to 1996. The good old days where I didn't even exist yet. But you know who did? A man named Shinji Mikami, who just finished his first director role for a little game called Resident Evil, a game that was going through the Silent Hill treatment at Capcom where the entire company was prepared for a flop on their hands. They were prepared to go into damage and loss control, but everyone was surprised when the game was a critical and financial success. The success of Resident Evil made it so that the judgment of Mikami would be heard by Capcom, especially when it came to the Resident Evil series. This trust went deep in the company, and this was seen when he was working on Resident Evil 2. As the development hit around 80% complete, Mikami had the development restart as the game was feeling too similar to the first, causing the game's budget to increase, making the game need to sell 2 million copies to make a profit. With a dev team of around 50 members, they managed to create another masterpiece. All the ports made Resident Evil 2 the best-selling Resident Evil, at the time selling 6 million copies. This success brought more power to Mikami, and he would be involved with plenty of other great games, with him either taking a producer or director role. With constant successes, allowed for Mikami to make the next big move for Capcom. Mikami's next big move brings us to the futuristic year of 2000, where many developers saw Nintendo's GameCube. The pure power of the little cube excited Mikami to the point where he signed an exclusivity deal with Nintendo. This deal made it so that any mainline Resident Evil game will be a GameCube exclusive. I mean, how could one of Capcom's biggest moneymaker be wrong? And with that mentality, Capcom went through with this plan. So the first thing they did was change the development for Resident Evil 0, as the game originally being developed on the Nintendo 64 changed to be brought onto the Cube. The change in platform caused for the game to be delayed. This is from the differences of working on a cartridge to being on a disc led to big changes for the game. The delay made it so that Capcom would need something to hold consumers over. So it was decided to port over the original trilogy, but they hit a roadblock named Mikami, as he wasn't imposed on having 2 and 3 brought over, but went against the original being ported, as he believed that the original Resident Evil didn't age well, so he proposed that instead of porting the game over, they could just remake it. This game could be used to show off the power of the GameCube and how much experience the Resident Evil team has gotten over the years. This was followed by many other members who mentioned things like the graphical power of the GameCube could bring the game closer to the team's original vision. This statement was also backed up by, I'm going to apologize for butchering your name, Yashiro Anapo, who was one of the programmers of the 1996 classic, but he brought up that the localization of the classic is bad, so a remake is just another element that they could easily improve. These factors caused Capcom to greenlight the game. But there was a catch for Resident Evil Remake, which was its tight deadline. The devs were only given a year and 2 months for development. The deadline was so tight that the last 2 months were a non-stop crunch. But the game did make its deadline, so it was time for a developer and publisher's favorite day, launch day, where the game had underwhelming sales. At the time, Capcom wasn't in a panic mode about the losses. I mean, it's possible that the idea of a remake of a 5-year-old game didn't make sense to consumers. Well, things went from an alright to a full-blown oh shit! As Resident Evil 0 also underperformed, causing Capcom to question Mikami's exclusivity deal. However, Mikami would defend his decision and talk about how the game's slow sales are due to the GameCube being slow at getting market share. So all they need to do is wait, as the sales of the GameCube should pick up. So, what's happening? Why was the GameCube struggling? For starters, the GameCube decided to come out a whole year after the PlayStation 2 launch, which happened to be their biggest competition. Secondly, Nintendo didn't see the market was changing, as consumers weren't buying a PS2 just because it could play games, but it was also a cheaper alternative to getting a DVD player. To many, the fact that it could play games was just icing on the cake. Finally, Nintendo was in this weird time where they really wanted to have this family-friendly image, which caused them to act weird when it came to M-rated games, as they saw many M-rated games to just be murder simulators, and this brought restrictions to developers. This caused many developers to just skip the GameCube and work on either the PS2 or Xbox. So why did Nintendo go with Capcom's Resident Evil? I don't know. To top it off, Nintendo also had the mindset that consumers would be more than glad to wait for the far more powerful console. While Capcom saw that the GameCube needed more third-party support, then the GameCube would have the potential of being the next big thing. And the possibility of being a part of the next big thing is something hard to pass up, which caused Mikami to double down on the exclusives for the GameCube with another deal. This time the deal was named the Capcom 5, where Capcom would bring 5 AAA games either made or published by Capcom to the GameCube. This deal is infamous for everything falling apart as only 4 of the 5 games launched. This hopefully is not a surprise as 3 of the games underperformed, which made Capcom wake the fuck up and realize they just repeated the same thing with games that have less recognition than Resident Evil. They did the sensible decision and told Mikami that the last game of the Capcom 5 can't underperform. That brought a lot of pressure to Mikami as that game was Resident Evil 4, and it already had 4 restarts, and the rising budget was significantly more than Resident Evil 2. To make it so the game would do well, Mikami soon announced that most of the games of the Capcom 5 would just be timed exclusives. This was an odd choice that no one saw coming, especially Nintendo, who saw this as a betrayal, leaving these 2 companies to have bad blood for years, and that decision led Shinji Mikami to leave Capcom. And there we go, that's the end of Resident Evil Remake, except for the fact that it's not! It's a game laid in GameCube purgatory until the high-tech year of 2008, where Capcom planned to re-release Resident Evil Remake on the Wii as a Japan exclusive. But they soon hit a roadblock named success, as Resident Evil 5 was doing great sales in both Europe and America, which changed the course, setting the game on a worldwide release, where it went back into purgatory, only this time it was stuck on the Wii. Until 2015, where Capcom decided to remaster the remaster of the remake, but this time on as many systems as they could. This version went on PS3, PS4, PC, Xbox 360, and Xbox One. And the game was a critical and commercial success, and looking back, it's easy to see that this was a test to see if people were interested in remakes. Because as soon as Resident Evil Remake was a success, it was announced that Resident Evil 2 Remake was in development. And that's the end of the history of the Resident Evil Remake, as well as Shinji Mikami's time at Capcom. This brings us to the game's story. Before starting, we are given a choice of character we want, and we're given 2 choices, either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. Now this choice isn't a cosmetic change, as each character has changes in the story and even different starting items. But this mainly adds another layer to the difficulty, as picking Chris makes the game harder as the monsters have more health, while Jill is easier. We start the game as part of Raccoon City's Special Tactics and Rescue Services, also known as STARS. We are part of Alpha Team, which consists of Barry, Chris, Jill, Wesker, and a few others, tasked with locating Bravo Team, as they were set to investigate odd disturbances of people being eaten. And the first thing found is Bravo Team's crashed helicopter. They move onto ground to get a closer investigation, only to be attacked by monsters. Being overwhelmed, they were forced to retreat to the closest building, which happens to be the Spencer Mansion. If any of this sounds familiar to you, don't be too surprised. Not only is it from a massive and popular series, but there's so many goddamn Resident Evil adaptations and various spin-off games, movies, and other forms of media. I mean, on the movie front, we have the 4 CGI movies. Then we have the Paul W.S. Anderson live-action series that managed to get out 6 movies. Yes. Now we have a reboot, with the newest movie being Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, which I found out when I was writing this script, and apparently it's coming out in a few days. So from the few trailers I've seen, it looks like a combination of the first 3 games for some reason. So no matter what or how hard you might try, you probably know something about the series. Now, when I first wrote this, I thought this game had a storyline that no adaptation touched upon. This was Lisa Trevor's storyline, but seeing one of the newer trailers, the new movie does seem to have her there, which is a weird inclusion to add, especially how her story plays out in the game. Whatever, I don't have much hope for the movie, as it looks like it's trying to tackle way too much at once, but that's just my opinion. Don't let this scare you away, as the game's story is rather good, as the mystery that they unravel in front of you is fun. This game really shows off how much the original team improved, as they know the right amount of information to give you to keep you going. An additional pie on the cherry is when going through a second playthrough and picking a different character to see all the differences, while giving the mansion a little more mystery to it. I don't really have much more to say about the story, so to solve the mystery of the Spencer Mansion, let's shuffle on over to the controls. The controls really show the game is from yesteryears, as it uses tank controls. While some may see this as a dated and bad idea, however there are 2 things to keep in mind. This predates Resident Evil 4 by 3 years. And 2, Resident Evil was originally designed with these control schemes as it predates analog sticks on the PlayStation by a year. So to keep the original feel of the game, they made sure to keep this control scheme. Even with this dedication of keeping it close to the classic, it's rough to go back to tank controls of 2002. And the team in charge of remastering thought so too, as they saw this remaster had the potential to bring in both new and old players. And with tank controls not really being used in many games these days, it would be hard for new players to get adjusted, which would leave a bad experience to newcomers, leaving this feeling of the game being clunky and rough. So the team designed an alternate control scheme that has the controls feeling a bit more modern, while keeping the spirit of tank controls. In both my playthroughs, I went through and used the alternate controls as they felt nice to use. Now even after praising the alternate control schemes, I won't lie as it felt weird to use at first. But nothing like a half an hour of adjustment before I knew the controls like nothing. Well, except for the map button, as for some reason it never registered in my lizard brain. But that wasn't really a problem as I would get to the map through the inventory. The game knows how to keep the tension up throughout a playthrough. For starters, the game doesn't have an autosave, so the only way to save is by using these ink ribbons. Then we must bring them back to a safe room and use them in a typewriter. This limited form of saving makes it so that you need to master the combat. If not, the zombies will bring you back to the last save, which surprisingly gives the zombies some more tension / spooks. Now the combat plays out in two ways. One is by juking the zombies and saving ammo, or the other is to actually fight them. To initiate in combat, you have to hold L1 to get in a firing stance. This makes us unable to move as the character aims, but we can adjust where they aim from side to side. From here we see the game has a risk and reward combat style, as there are 3 directions to aim. The down direction is used to target the legs to knock enemies over, and it has a medium range. Then we have straight shots, which allow us to hit the torso of the target, and this has the longest range. Now this option is the slowest route of staggering and killing, and it uses more ammunition, but the straight shots are the safest option. Finally, we have headshots that are the riskiest to do. This requires for the player to get close to the target, where the risk of being grabbed is increased. But headshots deal the most damage and have a chance of doing a critical hit, which will cause the head to explode, killing the target instantly. This combat style does work well with or without tank controls. The design of forcing the character to stop, aim, and fire has been a proven formula. This style went on until Resident Evil 6, where everything changed. Once we get used to fighting zombies, the game will throw out a new monster to scare the player. Now most of these monsters are absolutely classic and iconic, but we won't talk about any of the Resident Evil 1 monsters, just to keep it as a surprise for those that haven't played it. But to give an example, Resident Evil 2 has the liquor to throw the player off. Now I don't think this is a spoiler, as this is one of the poster children to horror games and the Resident Evil franchise. Well, I guess I'll talk about one of the new monsters that are specifically in Resident Evil Remake. The only reason for this, as it adds more depth to the combat, and these monsters are the Crimson Heads. If you kill a zombie but it's not from a critical hit, then it will start a timer. If you don't do something about the corpse, its skin will slowly turn red. When the timer is up, they'll get back up, and these fuckers are faster and deadlier than any other zombie. That was the controls in combat. Now let's talk about polygons! I mean, look at this game. It's hard to believe that this game is 19 years old. I mean, so much still looks great to this day. Now since we're spoiled by modern day graphics, I can understand how this game looks dated compared to many others today. So for comparison, here are some of the other big games released during that year, which are Elder Scrolls Morrowind, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and Super Mario Sunshine. Now when looking at these, you can see that Resident Evil really stands out graphically. Now the biggest reason for this is that Resident Evil Remake still looks good. It's because the game cheats by using pre-rendered backgrounds. For those that don't get what pre-rendered backgrounds means, well, the game doesn't render everything out like a normal game. All that is rendered are character models and everything that can be interacted with / picked up, while everything else was already rendered. To simplify it a bit more, the backgrounds are more like JPEGs or pictures that the character models walk around. With a small amount of things for the game to render out, it allows for some really high quality character models to be used. This is why graphically the game ages so well, but just like any kind of video game, it doesn't make the game visually future-proof, as some models and moments will show this game's age. Like anything that has to do with gore and blood doesn't tend to age well. Luckily these moments don't show up too much, which helps the game from aging quickly. The location and varied camera angles help to create this great atmosphere, as everything feels clustered and dark, and for me it's something hard to explain. But it also helps keep the tension. Onto the noises. The sound design holds up great, as all the sounds really go to increase the atmosphere. And that comes with the most common enemy, the zombies. These zombies make generic groaning noises that aren't scary, but it serves another purpose, and that is having a sound that tells the player that what enemy is ahead, which is nice, and all the monsters follow this sort of design. This does help, as the nature of the game, with static camera angles, tends to have enemies that you can't see, but with the sounds you'll know what is there. And that's all I have to say about the sounds, as it works and gets the job done. That's Resident Evil Remake. While I would love talking about every little bit about this game, I won't, because spoiling things ruins the fun for this game. I would highly recommend getting the game and playing it for yourself. as this fantastic game is hands down a masterpiece. Even Capcom knows this, as their recent descent into going through a remake binge in the recent years. They haven't gone through and remade the first one since it has this masterpiece. We have unfortunately gone through our ink ribbons, as we've gone over The Fear. I hope you all have an amazing day, and see you next time.